So I have to admit, I left my glasses at home, but there's none so blind as those that cannot see. But I've definitely seen the light, so I don't think I need my glasses. But we'll see how we go. So just some quick background. My name is Coleen Vogel. I've been working in this space for over 30 years. I'm actually married to one of you guys, a fund manager, who I've had to convince over and over and over, but who's now finally also seeing the light, and my daughter of 25, who up for most of her life didn't believe in this at all, but suddenly as part of the rebellion, clicking onto all the blogs and everything, and is saying to me, instead of flying around the world, Mom, when is your next trip? Normally she used to say, why are you doing this? You're just creating hot air. You're not solving the solution. Now she's urging me to go. So I hope I can share with you some information that may be useful. So we're living in a planet and a world situation which is really a can of worms. We're confronted with uncertainty, complexity, interdependency, or what some people call intersectionality, which is a fancy academic name to say how everything's coming together, and also controversy. If any of you watched the news last night, you'll see that the Democrats are moving, they're pushing this high up on their list, and they occupied the halls of Congress yesterday to make their case. But it's not an easy or simple slam dunk. But as Pravin Gordhan said yesterday, if you were watching that, we've got to up South Africa's case. And I want to up, not South Africa's case necessarily, but the case of climate change, to say that we've got one of the most wonderful opportunities now to do something positive. But we can't delay anymore. So there's no such thing anymore, as some people are saying, as climate deniers. It's more about climate delayers. Why do I say that? Well, internationally, things are coming together. We've got the SDGs, we've got the Paris Agreement, we've got the New Urban Agenda, the Sendai Framework. And in a sense, we need to morally stand up and say, we've got a lot of information now, why aren't we acting? So the story's quite clear. It's a good thing this talk should have maybe been closer to lunch, because you could have all gone and had a stiff drink, because it's quite depressing actually. If you look at the science and the state of the world, I don't know if you could, don't worry about seeing all the detail. I just want you to watch the trends, because most of you work in that kind of space, so it's the trends I want you to watch. These are the Earth system science trends. And you can see actually there that everything is going upwards. Ocean acidification, nitrogen, shrimp aquaculture, and so on and so forth. That's being coupled by a similar upward trend in socio-economics. So we've got a complex situation that's developing, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that. So in steps climate change, and humans are changing the climate. I've been on 2 IPCC panels. I chaired or headed the one on the African contribution, and I'll show you the African case in a minute, which is not great, but we are making a difference whichever way you slice it. We can take those graphs all the way back into paleo, what we call paleoclimates. We can drill down into ice cores, and we can get quite a good trend line going up. The reason why we're concerned is that the rate of change is happening very rapidly, and with a frequency, if you like, in terms of the events, that is becoming quite marked. So the day for having discussions like this, I think, is good, but we need action now. Honestly, I've become more of an activist, which doesn't please my university always, but I'm nearly close to retirement, and my daughter's saying, go, go, go. So I'm going to go. Maybe quicker than the university might want. So what is actually happening is a complicated set of graphics. And the IPCC is an interesting organization, because you really do need like 5 PhDs to sometimes get behind what is being said. But essentially the causation, yes? Oh, sorry, is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And every 7 or so years we do an audit of all the science. We don't do new science, but we make, if you like, statements based on the content of the science globally. And so the latest one is underway at the moment. And many of you, if you are serious in this game, would have known that there's been a recent report called the 1.5 report. If you haven't seen it, I'd urge you to Google it, because it is the latest benchmark of our science that we've put out to date. So what we do, which is a little bit complicated, I'm not going to go into the detail, is we use a number of scenarios to, like you work on the same financial futures, we try and look forward and see what will happen with our certain amounts of greenhouse concentrations and what options we have, and then we run those forward and see where that'll bring us to in terms of climate change. And you can see it's quite simple. You've got an envelope, much like you guys work with in financial funding and modeling. But that envelope, you can either take the low road or the high road. And most people are saying we have to start bending this curve. The interesting thing is that you can't bend it overnight. And that's why people are saying we really need to work on this as fast as possible. So the aim internationally is to try and keep us up here. And so most people are trying to work to 2.6. But the climate of South Africa is complicated already. We already have huge variability. I've been working in the space, as I said, for 30 years. My PhD and master's was to go backwards and see how we responded to climate variability. And we've had wonderful policy. In fact, in 1922, we had some of the best policy, and I don't know why we lost it. But some of us have been trying to resurrect some of that. But the point is, the system that we live in, the reason why Africa is one of the most vulnerable continents, which is what the IPC says, is because we have a very interesting configuration of the climate system. Now, I know some of you might have done geography, but essentially, we have a dominating high-pressure system on both ends of the continent. We have cloud bands that develop, and these systems influence how much rainfall we have. So we are already aware that we're living in a current state of change. We need to understand this better. So those of us at my unit, where I work in South Africa at Wits, we're very fortunate. We've just been joined by Francois Engelbrecht, who's one of the leading modelers in climate change. And what we try and do in our group is to try and understand these systems that we know already that bring trauma to us, tropical cyclones, El Niños, cut-off lows, droughts, etc. What happens when you now overlay already onto that varying situation, climate change? So the issue of attribution is becoming a huge hot topic. How much can you link directly something like climate change to the occurrence and the frequency and the magnitude of tropical cyclones? So it's a very interesting area of science. But I'm just going to go through these fairly quickly because I'm not saying that droughts are becoming more frequent. I think that's a debate that we are still having, although many in the science community are saying drought is on the horizon, going to become more frequent, its magnitude will be greater, and that will have a whole lot of knock-on effects. In terms of Cyclone Idai, some of you might have remembered that. I was very fortunate to be in a room the other day on a panel with Grassa Michelle, and the point that she made, which was fantastic, I thought, which we lose track of, she said, we study this in quite a sterile way. We don't really think about the people on the ground who lost their mothers, their fathers, their homes, or whatever. So I'm going to make a plea for that at the end of my talk. But the big debate now is, why did this happen? We know we have tropical cyclones coming all the time. Was this linked to climate change? How was it linked to climate change? And I think even if you're a denialist and you're wanting to debate who's causing this problem, the issue is that this kind of cyclone could be and will be, is what the scientists are arguing, something more common on the future horizon. The interesting thing in this one, just very quickly, was the configuration of where it made landfall. You had ocean waters bringing in water, you also had inland waters bringing in water, and you basically had a lake that developed in Beira. But again, I don't have to tell you that we've got an issue, right? Climate variability is real. So we've had the Cape Town crisis, and I'm working with the city of Johannesburg at the moment because they want to know, is Gauteng, when is our turn? I do have to add, though, that this wasn't just an act of God, and it wasn't just climate. It was also a huge human management or governance issue. So we need to keep that perspective as well and not blame everything on forces outside of our control. This is a picture I think some of you might have remembered, 2016. OR Tambo was knocked out. Apparently pilots were flying without any guidance because the radar was also knocked out. Don't know how true that is. I have a student who's studying Sitwetla in Alex to find out what this meant for residents who are there. Again, I want to make the point this wasn't just an extreme event that might or might not be linked to climate change. We also have to look at how we are getting rid of our rubble from our development in Sandton. If we are dumping that into the Yixkay River, you don't need a huge storm to cause a flood, you just need a little storm. So this conjunction of human capacity and what we can do and climate is a message I'd like you to take home with you today. So recently I joined with the University of Stellenbosch. We studied all the humanitarian events, and again, I don't know if you can see, don't worry about the detail. I'll take you through it even without my glasses. But we studied 12 years of humanitarian crises, and we tried to get a sense of the flavor of what those crises were in SADC. So we took as many countries as we could, and we tried to map this out. The points that I'd like to leave you with is that in these boxes are colors with different, so flooding is one color, etc. But in the boxes, if you can't see, are the names of countries in red. There are 2 points I want to make. Number one, when these are occurring, a cyclone isn't occurring by itself. It's occurring normally in conjunction, followed by a drought or preceded by a drought. It's normally linked to a cholera outbreak. It's now normally linked to a measles outbreak, etc., etc. So we're getting what we call these compounding disasters. And the other point I'd like you to take home is that it's not just one country in the region that is facing this. So from an economics perspective, it serves us well to get our act together as a region and not only as a country, because no one is alone in this story. So what we found of the 47 humanitarian emergencies that were declared, 37 of them were linked to environmental threats, and 26 of those were linked to flooding, and we found that it's now being compounded also by urbanization. So those are some of the facts. So what about the future? Well, I do think we've got some opportunities, but we've got to have a real debate about this. I don't think we're having real discussions about this at all. We're just kind of treating it as if it's not my problem. Someone else will deal with it, the government will deal with it, or whatever. These are maps from 2015, 2016, showing you the latest heat scenarios. Again, if some of you have been traveling in Europe, you'll know that they've been having excruciating temperatures. Not to say that we've never had excruciating temperatures before, but the warmest on record are now starting to trump each other every year. So you'll hear things, it's the warmest Parisian summer that we've had. And again, I'd like you to focus on Africa. These two parts of Africa, there's a reason why we heat up, and it's because, as I said earlier, of the climate controls that we have. But it's a complicated science. If it was simple, it wouldn't be taking up much of our time. I think our debates would be moving much, much faster. But it is an involved science. And so, for example, we need to keep our eye on a thing called El Nino. My son used to joke and say Ronaldinho. I said, no, El Nino, the Christ child. So it's linked to warming oceans, and when that happens, we get inputs into the atmosphere, and that system that I showed you right in the beginning of the slide then starts to react to what is happening. So we're starting to see some interesting signals linked to climate change. But folks, I'm nearly done. But this is the scary part. We have really good evidence to make the following statement, that plausibly we are going to be heating up, and we're going to be heating up quite noticeably, and that'll have a number of knock-on effects on agriculture, etc. We're trying to work with the city of Johannesburg to develop a heat plan. We'll also have flooding, increase extreme events with greater frequency and magnitude, and you're welcome to take this presentation and you can go and read some of the latest science on it. So while we might be getting hotter, we might also be having these extreme events, which will make huge inroads into development planning, roads, infrastructure, etc. The problem is that when you show the maps, you say we're going to warm up in 2099. That's not my problem. Well, I think I want to be on the right side of history when they make a call and say, what did you do about this when it was your turn? The problem, as I start to close off, is that this is an area where I think we have very little robust science. And that is, what is it costing us? Because as a fund manager, forget about, we can have a huge debate about mitigation adaptation, but when the pawpaw hits the fan, we have very little robust data. Some of us, we do have that we've been collecting, but what is it costing us if we're wanting to make the cost case after the event? To make the cost case before the event, in terms of the carbon transition, is a much more intensive debate that I think we need. So as I conclude, what do we do internationally, locally, government, civil society, and finally me in the room? Well, we've got two choices. We can only close our eyes and, ostrich mode. Not my problem, it's next generations. Or we can do something. We've been doing a lot in South Africa governmentally, and I've been heavily involved in that. And you can see over time this huge explosion. In South Africa, we punch way above our weight in the international negotiations. We've got debates on mitigation scenarios, but I would urge, and I think some of you who are activists in the room would agree with me, we're not having serious enough debates. So what is happening now, we're having to mobilize from below to put this on the agenda. We shouldn't have to do that. It should be everyone's concern. You heard about BHP Billiton. Interesting scenario. Do you carry on doing what you're doing? Coal, whatever, gas, and then have another debate? Interesting. We're having that same dilemma in South Africa. So I'm just going to move on because I know I'm running out of a bit of time. But NBI, the National Business Institute, has a lovely app. If you want to download it, you can get it, and then you can see what climate change is going to do to our country. We've also got the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disorders. Disclosures, maybe it should be disorders. Because if you look, it's very disordered, actually. I went and Googled some of this, which I'm new to, and you can see the issues around governance. So it is a bit disordered. So maybe I'll write a paper on that, the final financial disorders. So to end, I've tried to show you the climate story, but I think it's time for us to act now. We can't be having these discussions. 1.5, 1.55, 1.99, whatever. The line is drawn in the sand. Now we have to act. And we need to act, unfortunately or fortunately, on a number of scales. Practically, how do we shift our behavior? Politically, how do we shift that behavior, given the energy crisis that we're in, given the fiscus drag that we're in? But more importantly, each one of us in this room has to question ourselves, our own belief systems, and what we're doing. So to end, I'd like to quote from the young woman that's caused a stir. Adults keep saying we owe it to the young people to give them hope, but I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day, and then I want you to act. I want you to act as if you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if our house is on fire, because it is, and that echoes my daughter's sentiments. She wasn't as polite as that. She used some words that I cannot mention in public, but she said, "Mom, get out of there, because otherwise we are," and that I'll leave it at that. Thank you.